VanDyke is known for his portraiture. By the age of 20, VanDyke had his own commissions, aside from his assistantship with Rubens. Because he was so well known for his portraiture, the aristocracy really propelled Anthony VanDyke's career. Most of the aristocracy hires him to paint images of the aristocracy, paint portraits of the aristocracy. So VanDyke is skillful at creating the type of portrait that is able to flatter the sitter. Most of his portraiture makes the sitters seem more attractive, more wealthy, more lofty, and more powerful and wealthy. He accentuates their wealth and power in the poses that he stands in. There's a display of power in the portraits that you really can't mistake. It is the sense of power that the aristocracy has. This painting speaks of the estate that the sitter has, by showing the land that belongs to Charles the First. It's a glamour portrait. He stands there with his hand on his hip, with his hand atop his it's not a cane. I want to call it a stick. It's not a stick either. It's a lofty pose. For one thing, it's a full-length portrait, which is something that hadn't been popular until VanDyke popularizes it. Him standing there with his hand on his hip, his hand on his cane-like stick, he exudes power, especially in his fine clothing and fabrics. He stands in front of his horse and, of course, his servant who is attending to his horse. You notice that in every sense of the word, Charles the First looks down at you. As the viewer, you're coming into Charles the First's space, and he's asserting his dominance over you. He looks downward at your presence. There's a sense of superiority that the portraits look at you with in all of Anthony VanDyke's work. Charles I rules England, and he loves the land. In this portrait, he looks calm and leisurely, but dripping with power and glory. VanDyke really invents this visual language that's used, and it's repeated even in today's art. VanDyke puts in motion the ideas of the glamour portrait, to the point where, without Anthony VanDyke's pioneering of portraiture, even basic fashion magazines would not be the same today. Anthony VanDyke is obviously very popular in the 17th century. He develops this style, and it stays popular into the 1920s. John Singer Sargent was an artist that was highly influenced by Anthony VanDyke. 20th century fashion photography is totally indebted to Anthony VanDyke's style. VanDyke really separates his subject from his viewer by making his subject haughty looking. In fact, some modern artists or contemporary artists feel that Anthony VanDyke was able to accomplish such power in his portraiture that they actually use these 17th century portraits as a pun for power. The famous artist Kinde Wiley, who did the Obama portrait as Obama exited the White House, was an artist who feels that it's good to capitalize on that power. So just for a brief moment, let's take a look at the modern version of Anthony VanDyke, Kinde Wiley. So just wanted to add this slide into the lecture this week so you could see what I was talking about when I referenced Kinde Wiley in the prior slide. If you're interested in Kinde Wiley's work, there is an exercise in the Delve Deeper for you to respond to Kinde Wiley's work.